So this is Philip Mott with the Rhythm of a Drummer blog, and I'm sitting here with Mr. Scott Pierle, instructor at IRC Music, and drum instructor at IRC Music. I don't know if I should look at you when we talk.
No, absolutely not.
Because and Scott and I have known each other for a long time. What has it been? 10 years?
Yeah, something like that.
Probably shouldn't hit the table when I'm talking. And this is my first interview with someone in person, so we're
Mine
both
too.
a little we're both a little weirded out about it, and we're not really sure how it's going to go. But we'll try it out. So we're going to talk drums, mostly about practice and practice routines, and just for some background, Scott Pierle, at least what I know of him, is played drums for a long time. I'll let you fill in the blanks as far as the actual dates. But him and I worked together at IRC Music as instructors and co-workers. I've always learned a ton from Scott on technique and just things to practice and just different ideas to try at home. So I'm always, hungry to try new stuff, and he's always got lots of great ideas. Excellent drummer, excellent clock, and just fabulous timekeeping abilities, great tasty fills. A little bit opinionated about who he likes as drummers. Doesn't like all the indie rock drummers that I like and stuff like that. He's only like certain. He's kind of stuck up, I guess you could say. So that's my relationship with Scott. And Scott, I'll let you introduce yourself. Tell our listeners a little bit about who Scott Pierle is.
Well, as far as drumming goes, I started when I was 10 years old. Started taking lessons, and initially I was only practicing snare drum and also doing like xylophone, bells kind of stuff. I did that for about a year before I actually got a drum set. It was the worst drum set ever, but I talked my mom into buying it. We spent like $300 on it, and it was not even worth, 100 probably really, but I didn't know any better at the time. So, I guess all in all, this month I'll turn 33, so I guess I started a pretty long time ago.
Yeah.
23 years. So yeah, that's how I got started.
And when you took lessons, who did you take lessons from originally?
Well, my first instructor, I was going to this studio in Indianapolis, kind of on the west side, called Paul Mueller Percussion Studio. And my teacher initially was a guy named Craig Waltz, who I believe is a band instructor at, I want to say like Hamilton Heights Junior High or something like that now. So actually, that's why I stopped taking lessons from him, is because he left the studio to go be a band director at some school. So his replacement was a guy named Jim Paul, whose father, Richard Paul, was basically the owner of the Paul Mueller Percussion Studio. So I think I was with Craig for probably about 2 years, and then Jim for probably another 2 maybe years or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you did some stuff in high school. You said the other day when we were talking, you talked about doing some marching drumming. Tell us a little bit about what that was like, and maybe that's how that changed your playing.
Yeah, later in high school I did actually take lessons again for a short time from a guy who actually just lived in my neighborhood, and he was a real good rock drummer and real nice guy. His name was Eric Jones. He actually was the teacher at IRC before I was. That's how I got the gig.
Mm-hmm.
So I took some lessons from him, at his home. And then I did get into marching band and all that stuff, and there was a few various instructors that kind of showed up around our marching band in the 4 years that I was there, but the one that really made the biggest impression on me was a guy named Dennis DeClerc. His daughter was actually on our drum line. She was a couple years younger than me. But so I think for the last either 1 or 2, I'm not sure, years that I was in high school, he was instructing us. He actually kind of switched us from playing with match grip to to traditional grip with the snare drum. So that was my first experience playing traditional grip. I found it really hard at first, but once I got it, I really kind of loved playing that way, and I still do. But Dennis, he made a really big impact on me. He did drum corps stuff back in like the early 70s, when he was young. He played snare for 1 or 2 years in a corps, and he just was very informative.
And you still like to watch the marching band stuff when it's on TV and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. I wish I had more money to go to shows like that all the time. The DCI championships were held in Indianapolis for several years in a row here, and I didn't go to any of them. I did go to the first one where they were in Bloomington. Well, that was when Lucas Oil wasn't finished yet. They held them in Bloomington.
Oh, okay.
I did go to one show then. I haven't been to one since, but yeah, I really do enjoy those drum corps shows.
Yeah. And then after high school, you went to Berkeley for a few semesters and studied under some great drummers there. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, when I first started there, you would get a private instructor in addition to all your classes and labs and things. You'd have a private instructor. My first teacher there was a guy named Dave Cowan. He was kind of new there at the time, I think, but he was really good, a very good instructor. Berkeley is really all about being able to play in different styles so that, when you leave there, you're not just a one-trick pony that only knows how to play rock. You at least have to get at least a basic understanding of, various Latin styles, jazz, Afro-Cuban beats. So Dave Cowan did a really good job of, kind of getting me prepared, playing, different Latin beats and things like that that I was really pretty bad at before. But he helped me a lot in that department and, got me ready for all my little, exam kind of things that I had to do, regarding private lessons and stuff. But, so I think I was with him for maybe, 2 of the 4 semesters I was there. Then I switched to a guy named Rod Morgenstein for one semester. A lot of people probably know Rod. He was the drummer in Winger back in the 80s, and he's done a lot of other more jazz fusion type projects like Jazz is Dead, of course the Dixie Dregs, and many others that I can't think of right now, the Rudis Morgenstein project. And Rod was really cool, very positive guy. He would never just tell you that something you did stunk. He would always try to find the good in what you did first and then try to give you something, that maybe could be a little better. So he made you feel pretty good, and I tried to take that into my teaching and not just be all about the bad and make people feel crappy. But then I was with Rod for one semester. Then I was with a guy named John Hazilla. John is pretty strictly a jazz kind of guy as far as his teaching. That's kind of what you go to him for. He's a very, very, very good drummer. He did studies with people like Joe Morello and stuff like that. So his technique was really great. He was a pretty tough teacher though, but kind of the opposite of Rod. He would pretty much tell you when you were stinking it up. But I found that really good for me though. I needed to know when I was stinking it up. So I kind of appreciated that. I wouldn't say I'm that kind of teacher, but I kind of appreciated having one myself like that.
Yeah. So maybe at certain levels, a drummer really needs to be told, this is what you really need to do this differently, and don't do what you just did ever again. You need to. That's a bad habit. Stop it. Do something new. And I've found that as a student myself, that sometimes I really want to just hear that I'm good, and then other times I just want to hear, like, what do I need to change, because I know that I'm doing something wrong. So let's talk a little bit about the practice when you first started. And I kind of want to get into maybe some advice you'd have for people. I know a lot of people would love to study percussion and drums at a music school, whether it's for just a certain time period like you did, or whether to go for a full degree, or I mean, there's so many different options out there. Well, let's talk a little bit about what did practice really look like for you if you think back to when you first started. And I want you to try to be as specific as possible, because it will help me, because my whole goal is to create tools that will help people practice better. So if I can know what really worked for you, that will help me in my journey, and then hopefully it will help our listeners, give them maybe some ideas and things that they can practice, or if we have teachers that are listening, it'll give them ideas to tell their students or things like that. So talk a little bit about what practice looked like at the beginning level, and how that what worked and what didn't, and then we'll go from there.
Well, for starters, I have to confess that when I first started taking lessons, I was not a very good practicer. I didn't like to do it, especially in that year before I had a drum set. When I was just doing snare and bells, I really didn't appreciate it, and to an extent, I just didn't understand how that was going to help me achieve the goals that I had. I didn't understand that rudimental snare drumming does have a big impact on your drum set playing.
And what were your goals?
I wanted to be a rock star,
Okay. Yeah. Just like, man, that was my same goal. Yeah, what happened?
Exactly. So, playing rudimental snare drumming didn't seem like, like I was going to be a rock god from that or anything. But, of course, I understand better now that it has kind of everything to do with your abilities on drum set, as well as, as anything else. But so I wasn't a very good practicer when I started. And in fact, when I still was with my first teacher, Craig, I can remember him during a lesson kind of basically giving me a bit of an ultimatum, like, if you're not going to practice, you really don't need to be doing this at all. And it felt pretty crappy. And so I started making sure that I at least was prepared for my lessons when I showed up. There were so many weeks where I didn't even crack open a book or pick up sticks between lessons. So at least after he kind of got on me for that, at least I would make sure that I'd kind of looked over the stuff that we were supposed to do in the lessons, and made sure that I could at least, kind of convince him that I had practiced it,
Yeah.
But, which sounds really bad and weaselly, but that's kind of how I was back then. But once, I will say, once I got a drum set and, he started teaching me, actual beats and stuff, then I was a little more fired up about it. But we still were doing snare drum stuff all along. And, I still didn't really care for it, but at least I was getting a healthy dose of drum set stuff going on at the same time. And so that kind of perked me up a little bit as far as wanting to practice. And and I guess my best advice for anybody who's starting out or whatever is, don't be so arrogant to think that you know better how to learn than the teacher knows better how to teach. You know what I mean? You have to kind of, if you're going to take lessons from somebody, you have to trust them that they are going to lead you in the right direction, and just kind of take what they say and do it, I think I was kind of arrogant when I was young, just thinking like, this isn't what it's going to help me do what I want to do. But I was dead wrong, playing rudimental stuff. It's like, it's so much of who I am as a drummer.
Yeah, it's one of the oldest stories ever told, is just the student who thinks he knows more than the teacher.
Yeah.
And so, as a beginner, you didn't like practicing, and I think many of us were in the same boat. And said the teacher really, kind of got on you, kind of helped motivate you to do something. And then I think that's a big thing, is where that motivation comes from. And so that's going to be important over time as I create tools. Is it's got to be a tool that motivates drummers to practice more than they already do.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us how when you moved from that, um, what did your practice routine look like? If you could break down to some basic exercises, how many times did you have to do things before you felt like you mastered it? How did you know that you mastered it? Some
Mm-hmm.
things along those lines.
Well, I don't know if there's any sort of specific number of repetitions for anything for me to learn it, you know?
It's not like a formula,
Yeah,
but yeah.
like some of the books you and I have talked about going through, there's some of them, some books that I've gone all the way through, but I
Hmm.
definitely don't feel like I've mastered.
Yeah.
Um, so however many repetitions I need, I haven't done enough of them yet.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's a tough question. Um, you know, rudimental type stuff. I'm to the point now where even something new, um, it doesn't take me too long to kind of grasp what's going on.
Hmm.
Even if it's something that's kind of new and different to me, I can kind of grasp it pretty quick. With drum set, you know, um, some of the funkier kind of future sounds type beats.
Hmm.
You know, I can grasp them pretty quick, but I have to it's kind of like I just have to play them really slowly for a while,
Yeah.
almost just reading one note at a time, and then slowly but surely the entire idea starts to form in my head. For me, it's all about I have to hear it in my head. And
Yeah.
sometimes I don't hear it in my head until I've played it a lot of times at like a
Okay.
ridiculous slow tempo. But eventually the big picture becomes clear where I'm not just doing one note at a time, but I start to get the whole idea all at once.
Hmm.
Where I can almost like sing it back to you, like beatbox it almost.
Right.
And then once I can do that, I've got it pretty much.
Okay. Yeah. And I know that I think it was out of Garibaldi's Future Sounds book that he recommends with his exercises that when you first start to basically play one note at a time, allowing the whole measure to go through. So if you would you would hit the one, if that was the hi hat maybe, and then you would count the E and a, two E and a, three E and a, four E and then the next time you would play the one and then the E,
Yeah.
and that's how I had to do a lot of his rhythms to really get him.
I'm not patient enough probably to do it that way. I can, I just go slow enough that I can actually play through the whole measure, note for note. But like I said, for me, it's a matter of hearing it correctly, and it takes a few times through for me to hear it correctly. But, I'm experienced enough to be able to read the notes at a slow tempo.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, getting to the point where I am actually hearing, the actual idea.
Yeah.
But just building one note at a time, adding it on, you know, it's not my thing.
Yeah. And you talked about patience, and I want to talk about two things with you. And one of them, I just slipped my mind again, but patience, oh, I remember, yeah. So when patience and what do you do when you get stuck? It's kind of the two things that I'm going to talk about. So what would you recommend, for someone who's trying to learn a new concept, or maybe even trying to pick up a new instrument? What do you recommend for them to some strategies to be patient with themselves?
Mm-hmm.
And then let's talk a little bit after that about what do musicians do when they get stuck? What should they do? Because I think when we talked about this interview and getting together, that was one of your concerns is I want for my students to have a place to go when they get stuck, and so maybe we could talk that out a little bit more.
Right.
So let's go with that.
Well, first of all, getting back to your original question, just attitude-wise, how you need to approach getting stuck is you need to realize that no practice is ever wasted time.
Okay.
Like, even if it's frustrating and it seems like you're not getting anywhere, sometimes you do need to step away from it, but when you come back to it, a lot of times you'll find that frustrating practice where you weren't getting anywhere, the next time you go to it, you do get somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and all that time you put into it actually did help, you just didn't know at the time that it was. You know, I've had this recently because I sometimes like to learn other instruments or dabble in other instruments. And I've recently been playing the fife. I've been learning the fife, and so I had this experience just last week. I was playing and I just sounded terrible. I mean, I couldn't do anything that I wanted to do. But I still just kept going. Still wasn't getting anywhere. I was awful. So finally I put it down, and maybe a day later or two, I went back to it, and lo and behold, I could play a little better than I did before. You know? And I'm not sure why, other than the fact that I just kept trying, So, you just have to not get discouraged by those practice sessions that are really frustrating and don't feel like you're really making any progress, and realize that it is doing something for you, even if it's, even if it doesn't seem to be going well. There's something you're gaining from that. So it's all in your attitude, just kind of like having I'm going to keep going until I get it kind of attitude.
And I think that very attitude is sometimes what gets in people's way is, I'm going to keep going until I get it. And so they hit a wall, and they're like, well, I'm not getting it, even though they are. They don't have it yet, so they kind of give up. And sometimes they give up forever. Sometimes they come back and realize, oh, I was getting it, but it just, something wasn't clicking. And, I've talked with so many people online who really do have a lot of patience. I mean, they're just not getting it done, but they kind of know that concept that they just need to keep going and being kind of faithful with their practice schedule.
Absolutely. And I kind of said this a minute ago, but sometimes it is good to step away from it for a little bit, and come back to it. I think, I've had students. I mean, I think there's a certain amount of just digestion of information that you go through, and sometimes you can't digest it if you keep feeding yourself, So I've had students that might take a summer off, they kind of go when the school year is going. And I've had students, leave at the end of the school year and they're doing okay. Then they take the summer off and they come back in the fall and they sound way better than I remember them sounding when they left.
Yeah.
And I think it's just because, rather than continually giving them new information, pushing them along, they've simply had time to digest what we already worked on, and it sank in, And so sometimes a little break is not a bad thing and can even be very helpful.
And maybe some instructors need to build some of those breaks in. I don't know, maybe once every 3 months you have a lesson that's scheduled off so that you have, maybe more of that built-in time. It's hard to do because once you're making a living at something, you do count on that student to be there to, while you're trying to feed them information, they're feeding your belly.
Yeah, exactly.
Paying your bills and things.
Yeah, I'm not recommending my students take any time off.
If anything, they need more lessons every week.
They need to come 3 times a week, 4 times a week, however many we can do.
As long as they can digest it, I mean, you'll spend as much time with them as they'll pay you for, right? That's excellent. I really liked what you said, though, is that using that analogy of the food, that your body's going to get sick. You're going to reject things if you don't have time to digest them. It's kind of a gross picture, but that is what's going to happen.
Yeah,
the notes are just going to start spewing out of your mouth if you keep. That's stupid. I'm just getting off on track. So we did start answering kind of my third question, which is how should students approach practice? And basically what you're saying is just being patient and knowing that no practice is wasted. And let's get to kind of the $1 million question, and which is kind of the last scheduled question I have, but it might take a few minutes. And that is, what's the difference between practice and playing? Like, what? So many students, so many people that I talk to, they play all the time, but they're really not getting any better. And why is that not practice? What's the difference? How can we make sure that we're getting the practice in, but still enjoying our instrument by playing too?
Yeah. Well, just playing for the heck of it is really good, and I think there is definitely gains to be made by just sitting down and kind of experimenting and seeing what you can come up with. But the difference between playing and practicing is having goals and working towards specific objectives, Yeah. Whereas when you just sit down and noodle, there's really no objective other than having fun, which that's fun.
Yeah, yeah.
But you really, if you're practicing and you're trying to improve yourself, you need a specific goal to work on, which could be a page of a book or even one exercise on a page of a book.
Mm-hmm.
But something that for that session you're trying to accomplish. Like for me with my fife, I kind of have certain tunes I'm working on, so but also I just kind of work on the scale to try and improve, how well I can go between octaves and stuff like that. So I'm always kind of working on a specific thing. Like sometimes it's the scale and trying to, transition from one octave to the next real smoothly and memorize the fingerings a little better. And other times I'm working on, Yankee Doodle. So, but there's always, I'm never just like sitting there blowing in my fife, goofing off. Like, I'm always working on something.
Yeah, and maybe there's a period when you first start where practice is very easy because that's all you can do. You can't play at all.
Exactly, that's true.
Although I think that was more difficult with drums because, when I picked up guitar, all I could do was practice. So I did practice. And because if I tried to play around, nothing sounded good at all. But when drums, it was pretty natural. I learned a few things and I played a lot. And I guess some of that ended up being practice. Like maybe I sat down one time and said, I'm going to really figure out how to move this beat faster. And so I'm going to practice getting faster. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that's how drums are different than other instruments. And maybe other people might disagree. I'm not real sure.
I think the difference is anybody can sit at drums and do something that they think sounds cool.
Yeah.
Maybe I won't think it sounds cool, but to them, they're like, look at me, I'm awesome.
Yeah.
But, but with, guitar, unless you specifically know where to put your hands and make certain chords and notes, like, it's not going to sound cool at all. It's going to sound really bad.
Right.
Whereas drums, you can kind of play something that passes for cool pretty easily, even if it's really pretty stupid. But I don't know. I think drums are a unique instrument in that way. But back to my point, like I would not discourage anybody from just playing, especially with drums. I mean, for me, there's sort of the student in me that's always trying to, learn in a way how to copy what other people have done in a lot of ways. Like, David Garibaldi's book, he did it, and I'm just trying to learn to do it the way he did it, But, and I do that a lot with stuff, and rudimental drumming is way that way because, it's a tradition that goes back so far, and it's kind of always been done a certain way. The rudiments haven't changed a lot. There's been more rudiments added, with the drum corps. They have all these hybrid rudiments and crazy newer stuff, but it still all really goes back to the old, 26, standard rudiments and 40 international rudiments. So a lot of music is trying to learn like a tradition, I guess, in a way, and really kind of try to do it the same way other people did it. But then there's also the creativity aspect where you're trying to do it like no one else has done it. And that's where the playing is valuable. Like, working on, David Garibaldi's book or, Charlie Wilcoxon Rudimental Solos books, there's really no creativity in that. There's developing your musicianship, your ability, but that's not a creative thing to do, really, It's more just kind of, trying to almost assimilate into, what other drummers are doing and kind of, be part of the group. But then the creativity, really has to come from you and nowhere else. So, and that's where playing and not practicing is kind of a good thing, it's just as far as developing creativity. But I think, that's best done when you've done your homework first, So.
Yeah. And people have said this before, that it's not the time to practice on your double bass licks when your guitarist is there. Like, that's when you should be playing, not, practicing and trying to perfect a skill.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, I guess one other thing I thought about, we could talk about, what would you consider some essential tools for a drummer to have, either when they're getting started or maybe they've been playing for a while and they're kind of stuck? What are some things that they should have? Maybe some books, DVDs, or what do you think people should try to do to kind of keep the fire going?
I think some of the most essential things in my life, as far as kind of learning things over the entire time I've played, have been actually a really good pair of isolation headphones that will allow you to hear, stereo headphones that you can play music through or plug into a metronome. Having them be isolation headphones, you can hear your metronome and or your music, and it will kind of block out some of the drum sound so that the drums aren't overpowering the music so much that you can't really hear it.
Yeah.
And it'll kind of protect your ears at the same time, so that's kind of a good thing. But, just because I think a lot of people will go out and buy like a little metronome, but one that maybe doesn't have a headphone jack, or if they don't have headphones, as soon as you start playing your drums, you can't hear it. And so it becomes not very useful. So, so having a good pair of isolation headphones, don't be cheap about it. Spend $100,
Yeah.
Good pair of isolation headphones. A metronome that has a headphone jack would go along with that.
For those headphones.
A Tama Rhythm Watch is an excellent one. I have one. There's even some cheaper ones. Korg makes one that's, $25 or something like that. It does a pretty good job too, and it's pretty cheap. So good metronome, headphones, and of course, probably everybody's got one anyway, but an iPod to go with those headphones as well. Being able to play along with the metronome and or music is probably like the single most valuable thing that you can do, So, and of course there's many books that are good, assuming you can read music.
Yeah, I think that's where the line gets drawn sometimes, is that, there's so many great books, but what if I can't read music? Or what if, then I have to have the patience to learn how to read music and the patience to learn how to play drums.
Right.
And for people that are maybe 30, 35, 40, they don't feel like they have the time to really learn something new like that. So that is an important key too.
Yeah, I feel like a basic understanding of reading rhythm is pretty easy to attain, personally. I mean, maybe I think that because I'm a teacher and I know I can get my students to read music really quickly. So, I mean, that's just my opinion. So, when people come to me and they're like, I don't want to learn to read music, I'm always like, just give it a try. It's easier
too
than
bad.
you think.
You're gonna
I'm
learn.
like, just give it a try. It's easier than you think, and it'll actually, I think all my students move much faster, even taking the time to learn to read music. They move much faster than they would if we didn't try to read music, because basically, in the 30-minute lesson, I could try to cram some info down their throats, or I can, give them a handout, a piece of music, a book page that if I've given them the background to understand it, then they'll be able to work on it all week and not just during that 30 minutes where I'm trying to, okay, put your hand here, now put your hand here, but they'll actually be able to work through it on their own a lot better. So, in other words, it's a drummer who can read music is going to be more independent than one who can't, as far as learning goes, and have a lot more opportunity to work on their own,
Absolutely.
And a lot of students, at least my students, I think they kind of feel like, playing with me half an hour every week is kind of it. And when they're supposed to be doing stuff in between lessons. especially since they have the tools to understand their papers that I give them. My kids can read music pretty well. It's kind of a bummer that they don't take advantage of that more, but that's how it is.
Yeah, maybe that's another conversation, is how can we motivate our students? And as an elementary teacher too, I deal with that on a daily basis, is how do I truly reach the kids? And just, it's not like I'm trying to change their world or make them famous, but just to have them, to have the motivation to do what they need to do to succeed and not be frustrated. Because I hate, is watching kids get frustrated when it's like, well, if you would have just done your homework, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah. Well, I've had plenty of people that I taught that, it was pretty clear that they did practice every week and they did take to heart everything you said. And obviously, those are the students that turned out to be the best players. So,
and the probably quickest learners.
Yeah.
Even though they weren't really learning any quicker, they were just actually doing their homework. So they, they were getting out what they put in.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a great discussion with Scott Pierle from IRC Music, drum instructor. And this is Philip Mott from the Rhythm of a Drummer blog. Do you have anything else you want to add to our conversation?
No, but
any shout outs?
There's one. I'll make one promise here. I just started learning the fife like a month ago, but at some point I'm going to play fife on your blog.
Okay.
Maybe once I have Yankee Doodle down all the way.
Excellent.
I'm going to come and you'll record me playing that, and people will be like, "Man, that guy really does know how to practice."